Hugh Crane is the husband of Olivia Crane and the father of the 5 Crane children. The Cranes move into Hill House in the summer of 1992. This is where we see the household at their happiest. Hugh is a caring, loving father and a patient husband and supportive partner. Now I say partner because Olivia and Hugh are not only husband and wife, but business partners. They are professional house flippers and have just bought Hill House, their most ambitious project. While Olivia is more of the artistic mind, Hugh deals with the practical realities of home renovations. He hires Horace Dudley to help him with fixing up the house, but Hugh mostly tries to do everything himself to save on cost. To his children, Hugh is a very kind and caring father. Never overly harsh or strict, but he is firm when he needs to be. But between Hugh and Olivia, Hugh is definitely the more lenient parent. We see this when Shirley asks to keep the kittens. While Hugh is reluctant, he ultimately gives in due to Shirley's pleas. Stephen Crane, the oldest of the children, looks up to his father and tries to emulate him. He also wants to help out his father whenever possible. Hugh's patient and kindly nature is highlighted when Steve and Hugh work on getting rid of the mold in the basement. An accident occurs when Steve is asked to unplug a broken fan so Hugh can repair it. We see Steve move towards the outlets to unplug the fan, but the scene cuts away before we see Steve actually unplugging it. Hugh is then distracted by the silhouette of the mold, and as he reaches for the fan starts, slicing Hugh's hand open, leaving a nasty wound. While Hugh is in pain, he is surprisingly calm and gentle with his son. He's profusely bleeding, yet he's still trying to console his son and reassure him that everything was okay. To the rest of the children, he tries to involve them in his projects and teaches them things. He obviously enjoys what he does and is good at it, and wants to share it with his kids. When Nell and Luke start to tell him about the scary things they witness, Hugh is never critical of them and tries to comfort them the best way he can. But he doesn't overly coddle his children, and while he comforts them, he does encourage them to try to be brave. As husband and wife, it is pretty obvious how much Hugh and Olivia love each other. They're very caring and affectionate with one another, and even their arguments are never mean-spirited or nasty. We see this when the couple argue about the handling of Shirley's kittens. While they disagree with one another, they are still civil and respectful. An older Hugh later tells Steve, "You're on the same team, even when you're in the middle of a fight. During the fight, you're forgiven. There's no fear. There's no danger. You're safe. We weren't perfect, but we are always kind, and we loved each other hard." It is notable that Hugh is the family member who is the least affected by Hill House's supernatural influence. This will factor into a lot of his decision-making throughout the show. Some audiences of the show think that Hugh could have potentially done more to maybe keep his family safe. Maybe if he had sent Olivia away faster, or listened to Horace Dudley's advice a little bit more seriously, and maybe even listening to his children, specifically Luke, when he tells Hugh that the house was bad. But Hugh's actions are of a very practical and normal person in that situation. He doesn't experience the visions his wife and children do. To him, Hill House is just another house, albeit a frustrating and difficult renovation project. Olivia and Hugh are professional home renovators, so this is very much the norm for them. The only things that were really out of ordinary for Hugh would be the strange issues with the house, like the mold in the basement. While it doesn't make sense as to why the mold is so aggressive and persistent, it is not uncommon in old houses, especially homes as large and old and unmaintained, like Hill House, to have mold problems. Hugh cannot figure out where the moisture is coming from, due to the blueprints not showing pipes that would be the cause of excessive leakage. But again, we have already seen, with the discovery of the speakeasy, that Hill House's blueprints are not exact, and some construction on the house has been purposely left out of the official blueprint designs. This mold problem leads him into another strange issue with the house, the Red Room. The door to the Red Room is completely stuck and cannot be pried open, even with a skeleton key and a crowbar. While strange and unusual, it is not particularly something that would point to an overwhelmingly supernatural problem. Hill House is also the largest home renovation the couple has tackled, so the Cranes had a lot of their finances tied to the home, so they couldn't really afford to just leave the house behind. The profits made from reselling Hill House was what was going to be used to build their dream home, so leaving Hill House isn't something that he would have done without good cause. When Olivia's behavior escalates, he does come up with plans to speed up the project so they can leave the house earlier. So it isn't like he's completely dense to Olivia's mental decline. He's just placed in a very difficult position. He does manage to get a troubled Olivia to take a break away from the house, but she secretly returns unbeknownst to him. We have to remember that as show audiences, our hindsight is 20/20, but upon multiple viewings, I personally don't know what more Hugh could have done in his situation. Every character on the show seems to have some sort of object token used to represent them. Hugh's seems to be his pocket watch. Pocket watches have been around since the 16th century and have become culturally symbolic for its practicality, ties to family, connections to the past, and romance, all of which are related to Hugh's core characteristics. Let's start with the most obvious connection. A pocket watch is used to keep time. Hugh is very much on a schedule when the Cranes lived at Hill House. He's task-oriented and trying to get the house renovated and sold as quickly as possible. In the past, pocket watches were extremely convenient for keeping time, and with the rise and use of the railroads as a major mode of transportation in the 19th century, punctuality became essential for everyday life and transport. As mentioned before, he was a very practical man, so it is fitting that his token object is something that was popularized for their everyday use. Pocket watches are also common heirlooms passed from one family member to another. Even to this day, it is common for a parent to pass on a pocket watch to their children. On the show, we see Hugh doing just that. After the events of Hill House, a defeated and tired Hugh passes on his pocket watch to the young Nell. He does this to comfort her and as a reassurance that he will return. We also see this passing on of his legacy at the end of the show with Steve. While he does not pass on his pocket watch to Steve, Hugh does pass on his legacy and burden of Hill House onto his son. Steve is now tasked with watching over the haunted house and lives with the knowledge that troubled his father for decades. While Hugh is a pragmatic man, he's deeply sensitive and a romantic at heart. This is most clear when we see him with Olivia. The pocket watch again will come to represent Olivia and Hugh's love. Hugh's pocket watch has an inscription on it saying, "Journeys end in lovers' meeting." Olivia had that inscribed on his watch, which was a gesture of their love for one another. In many ways, this quote from Shakespeare's play, The Twelfth Night, is also prophetic, for upon their meeting again after the events of Hill House in 1992, the lovers finally reunite and Hugh's living journey comes to an end when he apparently suffers a heart attack and dies at Hill House. The inscription on the watch can also be seen as Olivia's claim over Hugh's heart for all time. Hugh never forgets about his wife, and his love for her doesn't diminish even after decades after her death. He conjures an image of her to keep himself company, and he never remarried. Hugh pines over Olivia for always, and finally, in death, we see him staying with her at Hill House. Before Olivia's death, Hugh grows very much concerned with Olivia's state of mind. He takes Horace Dudley's advice and asks Olivia to go to her sister Janet's house for a short time so she could take a break from Hill House. Unfortunately, Hugh underestimates how far Olivia has deteriorated and how much the house has truly influenced her. Instead of taking the taxi to the airport, Olivia takes it to the motel close by. She waits till nightfall and returns to Hill House unbeknownst to the family. This culminates in Olivia taking Nell, Luke, and Abigail to the Red Room for the deadly tea party. She had laced the tea with rat poison and served it to the children. Hugh is awoken by a concerned Shirley. He arrives moments too late to stop Abigail from drinking the tea, but he's able to save his own twins. He destroys the tea set while a frantic Olivia tries to stop him. This causes him to push her against the wall. The back of her head hits the wall hard and she's knocked unconscious. Hugh is able to rescue his children, and he takes them to the same motel Olivia stayed at earlier. He returns to Hill House, hoping to deal with Olivia without his kids around, but only arrives in time to find her broken, mangled body at the foot of the spiral staircase. He is devastated and goes to cradle her dead body. Clara Dudley and Horace Dudley appear and are shocked to walk in on such a grisly scene. They have come in search of their daughter, who is revealed to be Abigail. They're dismayed to find her dead in the Red Room. But her specter appears, and the truth seems to be revealed to the Dudleys and Hugh. Hugh then sees Olivia's ghost wander away in a daze. Olivia says she's having the strangest dream. It appears that seeing Olivia's death may have made Hugh more in touch or connected to the supernatural world. Wanting to put an end to all of this, Hugh wants to burn down the house, but the Dudleys convince him otherwise, saying that not everything in the house is his to destroy. The spirits trapped within Hill House seem unable to leave, and it isn't clear what would happen to them if the house was gone. So they beg him to keep the house safe so they can stay with their daughter. Hugh reluctantly agrees, and they form a plan to keep the house safe and away from other people. The Dudleys are kept on as caretakers, but the house is boarded up and the fence chained. The house is never placed for sale, and Hugh never lets anyone but the police and the Dudleys on the property. The children go to live with Janet for a time as Hugh tries to rebuild their life. Hugh tries his best to shield his children from the events of Hill House, but the tabloids, news, and public interest makes it impossible. In an effort to protect his children's memory of Olivia, as a caring, loving mother, Hugh pushes his children away and refuses to tell them anything that happened to their mother and the true nature of Hill House. His refusal to tell his children the truth causes a rift between him and his kids. They grow resentful and antagonistic towards him. Steve and Shirley take on more of the parental responsibilities for the children. Hugh is seen living apart from his children, while Steve, Luke, and Nell live in California, and Theo and Shirley live in Massachusetts. Hugh is seen living in Jacksonville, Florida by himself. Hugh is left a broken man. The loss of Olivia has completely destroyed his confidence and his will. He becomes rather absent-minded, depressed, and develops a persistent stammer when he is unsure what to say or do. He starts to see and converse with a spectral Olivia. It is unclear if she's just a figment of his imagination or some actual shade of his late wife. During the last episode, Olivia says that Hugh imagined his own version of her. But it is notable that Nell sees Hugh's version of Olivia at her own wedding celebration, so this can be interpreted at the viewer's discretion. The admiration and the adoration the young Steve once had for Hugh has turned into disdain and contempt. The adult Steve is barely able to carry a conversation with Hugh, and when they do manage to talk, Steve is very antagonistic and dismissive of his father. His other children aren't too much better either, but Steve is the most openly hostile towards Hugh. Nell is the only one to reach out to Hugh on her own, but this seems to be because she has effectively been cut off from her siblings and was the absolute last resort for Nell. It was also unfortunately too late for Hugh to be able to do anything to help her. At the family reunion, before Nell's burial, Hugh does tell the rest of the family what he knows about Nell's death, but again he is blamed for not being able to protect Olivia or Nell from what Steve believes is mental illness. Steve accuses Hugh of feeding into Nell's delusion of the bent neck lady and Hill House, which is illogical since Hugh refuses to tell his children much of anything to do with Hill House, in hopes of keeping them safe. He is then blamed for not telling them the truth of what happened that night when Olivia died. And when he does try to tell them the truth, he's seen as a crazy, delusional old man. So for Hugh, it is really a situation of damned if you do and damned if you don't. The family's unresolved issues with the event of Hill House ultimately leads to a huge fight, which leaves each family member more isolated and alone. Shirley and Steve are arguing over the money made off the book royalties. Shirley is angry at Theo and her husband Kevin for lying about taking the money from Steve. Everyone is angry and upset at Luke for being a drug addict. Steve is especially angry at Hugh for everything, and everyone is mad at Hugh for being cold, distant, and a bit crazy. Any attempts of reconciliation made by Hugh are rebuffed by his children, but he keeps trying. Hugh keeps trying to be there for his children, and he eventually manages to get Theo to open up to him. Theo is able to start forgiving her father due to her own mistakes, which makes her more sympathetic to his past failings. His success with Theo gives him more courage to continue to try to reach out to his other children. Before Nell's burial, he takes his spectral Olivia's advice and sits with Luke, just being there for him. This does manage to get Luke to at least start talking to him, and the two of them reminisce about Nell finding out how Theo is attracted to women. To which Hugh casually mentions that he and Olivia had always kind of known since she was about 8. This is a nice revelation to Luke, and another small victory for Hugh. When Shirley becomes stranded at the funeral home because she refuses to ride in the limo with either her husband or Theo, Hugh uses it as an opportunity to talk to her. Unfortunately for him, he goes against his Olivia's advice and pries too much into Shirley's life, which she did not react well to. Later in the evening, Luke steals Theo's car and Shirley's credit cards. Steve decides to go to try to look for him. So Hugh insists on going with Steve, against Steve's misgivings. But in the car, the two are able to have a tense conversation. Hugh pries into Steve's marriage, which leads to Hugh recounting about how when Steve was about 1 year old, Hugh and Olivia had separated for 2 weeks, but the pair reunited and had to love each other hard during rough times. He urges Steve to do whatever he needs to mend things with his wife Lee. This leads to a defeated Steve finally confessing to his father about how he and Lee split up. Steve had feared the perceived mental illness in his family and did not want to pass on his genes to his children, so he secretly had a vasectomy right out of college, even before he met Lee. He never told her about the procedure, so she kept on trying to have children. So of course, when he finally does confess, she was understandably devastated and separated from him. The fact that he confesses about why Lee left him to his father is significant because Hugh is the only one he is told the truth to. His siblings didn't even know for a long time that he had even separated from Lee, so this is another huge step forward for Hugh and Steve's relationship. Once Hugh and Steve arrive at the gas station, and Hugh finds out that Luke is planning on burning down Hill House, we see a more assertive Hugh take charge of the situation. He is more like his younger self, and is determined to save his family. While Hugh goes through great efforts to keep his children away from Hill House, he ultimately fails, and all of his children are taken to the Red Room through the house's machinations. Hugh finally is able to meet Olivia again, and the two get into a debate that will ultimately decide the fate of the remaining Crane children. Olivia believes that they are finally reunited together at Hill House, and will be forever protected behind the walls of the house. She sees the world as evil and monstrous, so she believes that she is ultimately saving and preserving their family. She's angry at Hugh for taking the children away, but again we see, even when the couple are upset with each other, that they are never hateful. It is clear that Olivia is still deeply in love with her husband, and has been waiting desperately for his return. To save his children, Hugh tries to reason with Olivia, arguing that whatever pain and misery the children will face in the real world is inevitable. It is a harsh reality of being a parent, and a deal that every parent has to make. He argues that keeping the children from the real world isn't truly allowing them to live. He reminds Olivia about the good and beautiful things that children will get to experience, and uses Nell's wedding as an example. Keeping the children at Hill House will forever keep them from not only misery and pain, but all of the other beautiful things as well. While he's able to make Olivia see some reason, she's terrified of being alone again. So Hugh makes a deal with her. He will forever stay with her at Hill House if she allows the children to go free. It is unclear what happens next, but it appears that Hugh doesn't take his heart medication, which leads to his death. His ghost is able to open the red door. Unbeknownst to his children except Steve, his body is lying in the corner near the spiral staircase. Shirley and Theo then drive away with Luke to the hospital. Steve stays behind to say a final farewell to his father. Father and son finally make amends, and Steve is tasked with keeping the family safe from Hill House, just as Hugh had tried to do. Hugh's final words to his son are of love, as Hugh tells Steve how proud he is of him, and urges the family to be kinder to one another. Hugh walks into the Red Room to embrace Olivia and Nell, and the door shuts behind them. Hugh's story is of an ordinary man fighting against an extraordinary force. He makes a lot of mistakes and fails at a lot of things in his life, but he tries his best to mend things and tries to look after his family the best way he knows how. Ultimately, Hugh Crane is a proud father to his children and a devoted and loyal husband to his wife, Olivia. Thank you for watching the video. Sorry for the change in audio sound midway in the video. I'm still experimenting with recording and editing, so please bear with me. We have one more video to go before the Cranes are done. So if you like the video, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for your comments and support, and I'll see you in the next video.